The sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway at exactly 6:47 a.m., red and blue lights cutting through the morning mist rolling off Lake Serenity. Deputy Martinez stepped out, his face grim as he approached my cabin's front porch, where I sat drinking coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. "Mr. Davidson," he said, tipping his hat, "I've got some papers here from the Lakeside Estates HOA. They're claiming you're trespassing on their property." I took a slow sip of my coffee, steam curling around my face as I smiled. "Well, Deputy, that's interesting. Because as of yesterday afternoon, they're the ones trespassing on mine." The confusion in his eyes was priceless. Little did he know, I just pulled off the most expensive revenge in HOA history, and the Lakeside Estates Board was about to discover they'd messed with the wrong cabin owner. 3 months earlier, I'd inherited this rustic lakefront cabin from my grandfather, Eddie Davidson. Grandpa Eddie had leased this slice of paradise from the state for 47 years, paying his modest annual fee religiously every January. The cabin itself was nothing fancy: 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a stone fireplace that had warmed 3 generations of our family. But the location? Pure magic. Nestled between towering pines with 200 feet of pristine lakefront, it was the kind of place where time moved slower and worries melted away like morning fog. The lake stretched out before the cabin like a mirror, reflecting the surrounding hills dotted with expensive homes. Most of those homes belonged to the Lakeside Estates, a gated community that had sprung up 15 years ago when developers bought the land on the opposite shore. Their HOA controlled everything from mailbox colors to the height of grass and their perfectly manicured lawns. I'd been coming to Grandpa's cabin since I was 7 years old. Every summer, every holiday, every chance I could get away from my tech consulting business in Denver. When he passed last spring, leaving me the cabin in his will, I thought I'd won the lottery. I had no idea I'd inherited a war. The trouble started my first weekend as the official cabin owner. I was out on the dock, replacing some rotted boards, when a pristine white boat pulled up. A woman in her 50s stepped out, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the lake breeze, wearing a polo shirt with Lakeside Estates HOA board president embroidered on the chest. "You must be Eddie's grandson," she said, her smile sharp as a knife. "I'm Margaret Thornfield, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. We need to talk." Margaret's smile never reached her eyes as she climbed onto my dock without invitation. Behind her, a man in his 40s, wearing a suit despite the heat, followed Richard Pemberton. She introduced him as the HOA's legal counsel. "Your grandfather was, let's say, resistant to progress," Margaret began, her voice carrying the kind of authority that crushed lesser mortals. "But now that you're taking over, we have an opportunity to fix some long-standing issues." I set down my hammer, wiping sawdust from my hands. "What kind of issues?" Richard stepped forward, pulling out a leather portfolio. "The aesthetic issues primarily. Your cabin, while charming in its own way, doesn't align with the community standards we've established for the lake." I looked back at my grandfather's cabin, weathered cedar siding that had aged to a beautiful silver-gray window boxes overflowing with wildflowers, a stone chimney that had stood for 60 years. Then I looked across the water at their development, identical beige mansions with identical lawns, each one looking like it had rolled off an assembly line. "Community standards?" I asked. Margaret's smile tightened. "Mr. Davidson, Lake Serenity has become one of the most prestigious addresses in the county. Property values have increased 40% in just the past 3 years. But your rustic cabin creates a visual blight that affects everyone's investment." "Good thing I'm not part of your HOA then," I said, turning back to my dock repairs. "Actually," Richard interrupted, pulling documents from his folder, "that's where you're mistaken." The papers he showed me made my blood run cold. Somehow, someway, They claimed my grandfather's lease had been transferred to HOA oversight 3 years ago. According to their documents, I was now subject to Lakeside Estate's architectural guidelines, maintenance requirements, and monthly fees. "This has to be a mistake," I said, scanning the legal jargon. Grandpa never mentioned anything like this. Margaret's expression softened into fake sympathy. "Eddie was getting on in years, Mr. Davidson. Memory issues, you understand? He signed these agreements, but probably forgot to mention them." I knew my grandfather's mind had been sharp as a tack until the day he died, but I also knew when I was being railroaded. "I'll need to have my lawyer review these." "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "But in the meantime, you'll need to begin compliance immediately. The Architectural Review Board has identified several violations." He handed me another document, a list of required improvements that made my head spin. New siding to match the development's color palette. Landscaping to match their approved plant list. Removal of my grandfather's hand-built stone retaining walls. Complete dock reconstruction using their specified materials. The estimated cost? $180,000. And the monthly HOA dues are $850, Margaret added cheerfully. With a $15,000 special assessment this year for lake maintenance and security upgrades. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Even if I could afford these changes, which I couldn't, they would destroy everything that made the cabin special. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was about forcing me out. "What if I refuse?" I asked. Margaret and Richard exchanged glances. "The HOA has enforcement mechanisms," Richard said. "Fines, liens, ultimately foreclosure if necessary." We'd hate to see it come to that. They left me standing on my dock, staring at papers that could destroy my family's legacy. As their boat disappeared around the bend, I realized this was just the opening shot in a war I never wanted to fight. But they'd picked the wrong enemy. The harassment started within a week. First came the violation notices, yellow tags hanging on my door like scarlet letters. My grandfather's flower garden violated the approved plantings list. The stone fire pit, where 4 generations of Davidsons had roasted marshmallows, was an unpermitted structure. Even the old wooden canoe tied to my dock was deemed a visual nuisance. Each violation carried a $200 fine that doubled every month if not corrected. Then came the noise complaints. Every morning, at precisely 7 a.m., my phone would ring. Different voice each time, but always the same complaint: I was disturbing the peace. Power tools too early. Music too loud. Dogs barking. Never mind that I didn't own any power tools louder than a cordless drill, rarely played music, and the closest thing I had to a dog was the family of raccoons that visited my trash cans. Margaret made sure I knew she was behind it all. She'd cruise by in her boat during these alleged violations, smiling and waving while talking on her phone. The message was clear: comply or be destroyed. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during my nephew's 10th birthday party. Jake had been looking forward to this weekend for months, his first time at the cabin since Grandpa Eddie's passing. I'd planned a perfect day: fishing in the morning, swimming in the afternoon, s'mores around the fire pit that evening. We were just finishing lunch on the deck when Margaret's boat appeared, followed by 2 others. She climbed onto my dock with the confidence of someone who owned the place, trailed by 4 other HOA board members I didn't recognize. "Mr. Davidson," she called out, her voice carrying across the water. "We need to discuss your continuing violations." "Not now," I said firmly. "This is a private family gathering." "I'm afraid the noise ordinance doesn't recognize family exceptions," she replied, pulling out her phone. "Multiple residents have reported excessive noise levels." Jake and his 2 friend city kids who'd been laughing and splashing in the water went quiet. The magic of the moment evaporated like steam. "What noise?" I demanded. Kids playing in the water? Amplified music, shouting, "Disruptive water activities during quiet hours." Richard read from a tablet. Behind him, the other board members nodded gravely. I checked my watch. 2:30 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. Quiet hours? The new ordinance, passed last week, Margaret said smugly. Quiet hours are now 8 p.m. to 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. daily. We sent you the notification. Of course, I'd received no notification. This was harassment, pure and simple. You can't enforce HOA rules on state leased land, I said. Margaret's smile could have cut glass. Actually, we can. The state transferred enforcement authority to us as part of their cost-cutting measures. Didn't you get that memo either? My lawyer, Tom Rodriguez, had warned me this might happen. HOA legal warfare was expensive, drawn out, and usually favored whoever had deeper pockets. Margaret and her board could afford to bleed me dry with legal fees while I struggled to keep my business afloat. You have 10 minutes to disperse this gathering, Richard announced, or we'll be forced to call authorities. I looked at Jake's disappointed face, at his friends, who'd driven 4 hours for this party, at the birthday cake sitting untouched on the picnic table. Something inside me snapped. Get off my property, I said quietly. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? I said, get off my property, now. Mr. Davidson, I don't think you understand the gravity of it. I understand perfectly. My voice was getting louder, and I didn't care. You're trying to steal my family's cabin through legal extortion. You're harassing children at a birthday party. And you're standing on my dock without permission. Leave, now. The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like an hour. Finally, Margaret nodded to her board members, and they retreated to their boats. This isn't over, Mr. Davidson, she called back. The Architectural Review Board meets Monday. Your violations will be discussed. As their boats disappeared, Jake tugged on my sleeve. Uncle Mark, are we in trouble? I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile. No, buddy. We're not in trouble. But we might need to end the party a little early. That night, after Jake and his friends had fallen asleep in the cabin's loft, I sat on the deck, staring across the dark water at the lights of Lakeside Estates. Every twinkling window represented someone who'd voted to destroy my family's legacy. Someone who thought their property values mattered more than 47 years of memories. I opened my laptop and began researching. If Margaret wanted to play hardball, I'd better learn the rules of the game. What I discovered kept me awake until dawn. The next morning brought a certified letter that made my stomach drop. The HOA Architectural Review Board had voted unanimously to declare my cabin structurally non-compliant and aesthetically incompatible. I had 30 days to submit renovation plans, bringing the property up to community standards, or face immediate legal action. The required changes had grown since Margaret's first visit. Now they wanted a complete rebuild, new foundation, new septic system, new everything. The estimated cost had jumped to $280,000, more than twice what my grandfather had paid for the land and cabin combined. But buried in their legal documentation, I found something interesting. The HOA claimed authority over my lease through something called the Lake Serenity Comprehensive Management Agreement, a document supposedly signed by the state 3 years ago. Tom Rodriguez agreed to research it for a flat fee I could barely afford. What he found a week later changed everything. Mark, you need to sit down for this, Tom said over the phone. I've been through every state database, every filing, every public record. This comprehensive management agreement doesn't exist. What do you mean? I mean, Margaret and her board have been operating under fraudulent authority. They've been collecting fines, issuing violations, and threatening legal action based on a document that was never signed, never filed, and never approved by any state agency. My hands shook as I processed this information. So they can't force me to renovate? Not only can't they force you to renovate, they owe you damages for every fine they've illegally collected from other leaseholders. Mark, this could be a massive class action lawsuit. But even as Tom spoke, I knew a lawsuit wasn't enough. Margaret and her board had terrorized my family, ruined my nephew's birthday, and spent months trying to steal my inheritance. They deserved more than just a legal slapping. They deserved to lose everything. That's when I made the phone call that would change everything. State Parks Land Management. This is Sarah. Hi, Sarah. This is Mark Davidson. I lease cabin 47 on Lake Serenity, and I'm interested in discussing purchase options for my plot. Oh, Mr. Davidson. I was hoping you'd call. We've been trying to reach existing leaseholders about some exciting opportunities. My heart started pounding. What kind of opportunities? Well, due to budget constraints, the state is looking to sell several of our smaller park properties. Lake Serenity State Park is on the list. We're required to offer first purchase rights to existing leaseholders before putting it up for general auction. I gripped the phone tighter. The entire park? All 847 acres, including the lake and surrounding forest. The minimum bid is $2.8 million, which honestly is well below market value. We're hoping someone who loves the area will step forward. Margaret's words from weeks ago echoed in my head. Property values have increased 40% in just the past 3 years. If Lake Serenity land was worth that much, and the state was selling below market. Sarah, what's the deadline for bids? Sealed bids are due next Friday. But Mark, I should warn you, there's already been interest from a development group. They're talking about dividing the land and building luxury condos. A development group, probably backed by Margaret and the Lakeside Estates, HOA planning to buy the state land and force out all the existing leaseholders to build more cookie-cutter mansions. Sarah, can you send me the bid package? I'm very interested. Of course. But Mark, $2.8 million is a substantial amount. Do you have financing arranged? I smiled, thinking of the tech startup I'd sold 2 years ago, the one that had left me with exactly enough money to live comfortably and work part-time consulting. Money I'd been saving for early retirement. Money that was about to buy me the most expensive revenge in HOA history. Sarah, I'll have the financing arranged by end of business today. The next week passed in a blur of phone calls, bank transfers, and paperwork. I liquidated investments, took out a commercial loan against my Denver condo, and called in favors from every wealthy client I'd ever helped. By Thursday night, I had $2.8 million sitting in an escrow account. By Friday afternoon, I'd submitted the highest bid in the state auction, $3.2 million for the entire Lake Serenity State Park. I didn't tell anyone except Tom Rodriguez, who insisted on reviewing every document before I signed. Even he thought I'd lost my mind. Mark, this is insane, he said, reviewing the purchase agreement. You're buying 847 acres to spite an HOA? I'm buying 847 acres to protect them, I corrected. And yes, to spite an HOA. The state's acceptance call came the following Monday morning while I was sitting on my dock, watching Margaret's boat cruise past on her morning patrol route. She waved with that same smug smile, probably thinking about the architectural review board meeting scheduled for that afternoon. Mr. Davidson, this is Commissioner Patricia Wells with State Parks. Congratulations, your bid has been accepted. Lake Serenity State Park is yours. I nearly dropped the phone. Even though I'd expected this, hearing it made it real. I owned the lake. I owned the forest. I owned every tree, every trail, every fish that swam in these waters. Most importantly, I owned the land underneath Lakeside Estates' precious boat slips and private beaches. When does the transfer become official? I asked. Papers are being filed this morning. You'll have full ownership rights as of noon today. I checked my watch, 11:47 a.m. Margaret's boat was making another pass, this time slower, clearly curious about why I was on the phone looking so happy. She probably thought I was calling to surrender, to apologize and beg forgiveness before the Architectural Review Board meeting. She had no idea she was looking at her new landlord. At exactly 1 p.m. I called the Lakeside Estates HOA office. Good afternoon, Lakeside Estates. This is Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. This is Mark Davidson. I need to speak with Margaret Thornfield immediately. I'm sorry. Mrs. Thornfield is in meetings all day. The Architectural Review Board is... Jennifer, please tell Margaret that the new owner of Lake Serenity State Park needs to discuss some urgent property matters. I think she'll want to take this call. The hold music lasted exactly 47 seconds before Margaret's voice came on the line, dripping with condescension. Mr. Davidson, I hope you're calling to discuss your compliance timeline. The board is prepared to be reasonable if you're ready to cooperate. Actually, Margaret, I'm calling about your compliance timeline. I beg your pardon? As of noon today, I am the owner of Lake Serenity State Park. All 847 acres, including the lakebed, the shoreline, and approximately 40% of your community's lot boundaries. The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. That's impossible, she finally whispered. I have the deed right here, Margaret. Filed with the county at 11:52 a.m. Now, we need to discuss some violations I've identified. What violations? I opened the legal pad where I'd been making notes all morning. Let's start with your boat slips. They're built on my shoreline without permits or lease agreements. Then there's the matter of your private beaches, your waterfront gazebos, and that lovely stone jetty your community built last year. Another long silence. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice had lost all its authority. Margaret, in 30 minutes, every Lakeside Estates resident is going to receive a certified letter informing them that their waterfront amenities are built on private property without permission. They have 72 hours to remove all structures or face trespassing charges. You can't do this. We have rights. The same rights I had when you tried to steal my family's cabin. I let that sink in for a moment. Don't worry, Margaret. I'm prepared to be reasonable. If you're ready to cooperate. I could hear her breathing heavily, probably calculating how much it would cost to relocate 63 boat slips, 4 private beaches, 2 gazebos, and a stone jetty. What do you want? She asked finally. First, you're going to rescind every violation, fine, and requirement you've illegally imposed on state park leaseholders. Second, you're going to issue a public apology for operating under fraudulent authority. Third, you and your board are going to resign immediately. And if we refuse, then tomorrow morning, I start charging rent. Fair market rate for waterfront property in this area runs about $2,000 per month per boat slip. Your residents have 63 slips. That's $126,000 monthly, payable to me. The calculation was apparently too much for Margaret. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Richard Pemberton, the HOA's lawyer. Mr. Davidson, I think there's been some miscommunication. No miscommunication, Richard. I own the lake. You built on my land without permission. Pretty straightforward property law. Surely we can work something out. A reasonable lease arrangement. I'm not interested in lease arrangements, Richard. I'm interested in justice. What kind of justice? The expensive kind. By 3 p.m., 3 more board members had called to negotiate. By 4 p.m., Margaret was back on the line, her voice shaking with rage. "You're destroying property values for everyone. Our residents will lose millions. The same way you tried to destroy my grandfather's legacy?" That was different. We were trying to improve the community by committing fraud, by harassing families, by terrorizing children at birthday parties. For the first time since I'd met her, Margaret Thornfield had nothing to say. The emergency HOA board meeting was called for 6 p.m. that evening. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. From my deck, I could see the lights blazing in the community center across the lake, could hear the raised voices carrying across the water. At 6:47 p.m., my phone rang. "We accept your terms," Margaret said without preamble. "All of them?" "All of them." "Excellent. I'll expect the resignation letters and public apology by tomorrow morning. And you'll allow our residents to keep their boat slips and beaches?" I smiled, watching the lights reflecting off the dark water. "Margaret, I'm not a monster. Your residents can keep their amenities for a very reasonable lease. Say $500 per month per slip. That's still $31,500 monthly? Considerably less than market rate. Consider it the friends and family discount." She hung up again. The next morning brought a parade of visitors to my cabin. First came Margaret herself, alone this time, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. She'd aged 10 years overnight. "The resignation letters," she said, setting papers on my picnic table. "All 5 board members. Effective immediately." I reviewed them carefully. Each one cited personal reasons for their sudden departure from HOA leadership. "And the public apology?" She handed me a second document, a letter to be mailed to every Lakeside Estates resident, admitting that the HOA had operated under mistaken authority regarding state park leaseholders and apologizing for any inconvenience caused. "Inconvenience?" I raised an eyebrow. Margaret's jaw tightened. "What would you prefer? How about illegal harassment campaign and fraudulent intimidation?" She took the letter back, pulled out a pen, and made the changes with shaking hands. "There, are you satisfied?" I looked across the lake at her development, then back at the woman who tried to destroy my family's legacy out of pure greed. "Not quite yet." That afternoon, I called a meeting with the remaining Lakeside Estates residents. The community center was packed 67 families, whose lives had just been turned upside down by their board's illegal actions. I walked to the front of the room, past whispers and hostile stares, and placed a stack of papers on the podium. "Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Mark Davidson. As of yesterday, I'm also your new landlord." The room erupted in angry voices, demands for explanations, threats of legal action. I waited patiently for the noise to die down. "I know you're upset. Your board promised you waterfront access, and now you're learning it was built on land they didn't own. You have every right to be angry. What do you want?" Someone shouted from the back. "What I've wanted from the beginning. To be left alone, to enjoy my family's cabin in peace." I gestured to the papers on the podium. "These are lease agreements for your boat slips and beach access. The terms are simple: $500 per month per slip, payable annually in advance. In exchange, you get continued access to the amenities your board illegally built." "That's extortion." A man in the front row yelled. "No," I said calmly. "Extortion is what your board did to me, threatening to steal my property unless I pay $280,000 for unnecessary renovations. This is just business." A woman raised her hand. "What if we refuse to sign? Then you'll need to remove your boat slips and beach structures within 72 hours, as required by law." The room fell silent as residents calculated the cost of relocating their waterfront investments versus paying my lease fees. "However," I continued, There's another option. 67 pairs of eyes focused on me. I'm prepared to sell waterfront lots to any resident who wants to purchase permanent access. Fair market value based on recent comparable sales. I'd done my homework. Waterfront lots in this area sold for between $200,000 and $400,000, depending on size and location. Most of these residents could afford it, and permanent ownership would actually increase their property values. What about residents who can't afford to buy? Someone asked. The lease option remains available. And for residents who had nothing to do with the harassment campaign against state park leaseholders, I'm prepared to offer significant discounts. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, 41 residents had signed up for purchase agreements, 18 chose the lease option, and 8 decided to remove their structures and forfeit waterfront access entirely. Most importantly, every single resident now understood exactly what their former board had done and why they were facing these consequences. The real satisfaction came 3 weeks later when Margaret's for sale sign appeared on her lakefront mansion. According to local real estate gossip, she was moving to Florida, taking early retirement from her marketing firm and leaving Colorado forever. Richard Pemberton's law practice lost the Lakeside Estates account, along with 3 other HOA clients who didn't want to be associated with his fraudulent document schemes. The other board members either resigned from their day jobs, moved away, or simply faded into obscurity, their reputations in the tight-knit community permanently damaged. But the sweetest revenge came from an unexpected source. 2 months after the ownership transfer, I received a call from the State Parks Commission. They'd received multiple complaints from Lakeside Estates residents about my management of the former state park complaints that I was restricting access, charging excessive fees, and destroying the natural beauty of the area. Commissioner Wells called personally to investigate. Mark, I've received some concerning reports about your stewardship of Lake Serenity. Residents are claiming you're violating the spirit of public land ownership. Patricia, would you like to come see for yourself? She arrived the next morning with 2 other commission members, clearly expecting to find environmental damage or restricted access. Instead, they found the most well-maintained park in the state system. I'd used the lease revenue to hire a full-time groundskeeper, improve the hiking trails, install new picnic facilities, and create a small nature center in the old park headquarters. The lake was cleaner than it had been in years, wildlife was thriving, and the entire property looked like something from a tourism brochure. Mark, this is incredible, Commissioner Wells said as we walked the main trail. You've done more improvements in 2 months than we managed in 5 years. I had good motivation. What about public access? The complaint suggested you were keeping people out. I smiled and handed her a brochure. Lake Serenity Nature Preserve. Open to the public Tuesday through Sunday, dawn to dusk. Admission is free, but donations are appreciated for conservation programs. The complainants, it turned out, were angry that I'd banned motorboats during weekdays to protect nesting waterfowl, required fishing licenses to be displayed, and prohibited alcohol in the swimming areas. All perfectly reasonable policies that any legitimate park would enforce. Who's been complaining? I asked, though I already knew. Commissioner Wells showed me the letters, all signed by former residents of Lakeside Estates, people who'd sold their properties and moved away after refusing to pay lease fees for their boat slips. They were so bitter about losing their free waterfront access that they were trying to use state government to punish me for their own board's crimes. It backfired spectacularly. The Commission's investigation revealed that I was operating the preserve better than most state-run facilities. They offered to contract with me to manage 2 other parks in the region, providing additional revenue and official recognition of my conservation efforts. The story made the regional newspaper under the headline, "Private Owner Transforms Struggling State Park into Conservation Success Story." Margaret's name appeared exactly once in the article, in a paragraph about the previous management disputes that had led to the ownership change. Today, exactly 1 year after that first confrontation on my dock, Lake Serenity Nature Preserve welcomes over 500 visitors weekly. The hiking trails are pristine, the fishing is excellent, and families come from across the state to experience the natural beauty that Margaret's board tried to destroy. My grandfather's cabin sits exactly as he left it: weathered cedar siding, wildflower window boxes, stone fire pit where Jake and his friends roasted marshmallows last weekend. The only change is a small plaque by the front door: Eddie Davidson Memorial Cabin, a family legacy preserved. The former Lakeside Estates development is now called Serenity Shores, managed by a new HOA board that focuses on actual community improvement rather than power games. Property values have increased 15% since Margaret's departure, and residents regularly thank me for creating such beautiful public spaces in their backyard. I still get violation notices occasionally, not from any HOA, but from the State Environmental Agency. Things like excessive wildlife habitat improvement and unauthorized wildflower meadow creation. I frame these and hang them in my office next to the deed that made it all possible. Deputy Martinez stops by sometimes for coffee and fishing. He still chuckles about that morning when he came to serve trespassing papers to a man who owned the entire lake. "Did you plan this from the beginning?" he asked last month while we watched sunrise paint the water gold. "Not the beginning," I admitted. "But once I realized what they were really after, buying the park became the obvious solution." "Obvious?" he laughed. "Most people would have just hired a lawyer. Most people don't have 3 generations of family memories to protect. And most people aren't lucky enough to have enemies stupid enough to commit fraud in writing." As I sit here now, writing this story on my grandfather's old desk, I can see families hiking the trails he used to walk, children learning to fish from the dock he built, couples getting engaged at the scenic overlook where he proposed to my grandmother 60 years ago. Margaret Thornfield tried to steal my family's legacy and turn it into another cookie-cutter development. Instead, she helped me preserve 847 acres of wilderness for future generations to enjoy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything. And sometimes, when entitled bullies push you too far, the only appropriate response is to buy their entire world and evict them from it. But that's not the end of this story. Because last week, I received an interesting phone call from a man named David Chen in California. Apparently, his family's been fighting a similar battle with their HOA over a beachfront cottage his grandmother left him. "Mark," he said, "I heard what you did in Colorado. There's a state beach preserve going up for auction next month. The same HOA that's trying to steal my cottage is planning to bid on it." I smiled, opening my laptop to research California coastal property values. "David, tell me everything. And check your email. In an hour, I'm sending you the phone number for the best property attorney I know." After all, some battles are too important to fight alone. And some HOAs need to learn that there's always a bigger fish in the lake, even when they think they own the whole pond.